Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hey listeners, it's Geoff Pallay. I'm back to host another episode of Historical Ballot Measure Conversations. We're going to dive into a different state every month, explore the different ballot measures, initiatives, all sorts of direct democracy from each state's history. Today, I'm joined, as always, by someone from our esteemed ballot measure team. Today is Victoria Rose. We're going to continue our monthly historical ballot measure conversation with Oklahoma, where the wind comes pouring in the plain. Welcome, Victoria. It's great to see you.
I did not know you had such musical talent, Geoff.
You know, I've been listening to K-pop Demon Hunters recently that I'm learning, because that is what everyone is listening to these days. When you have a 7-year-old daughter, she's into it. And when you have an 11-year-old son, he fake hates it, but he loves it.
Secretly into it.
So we're all in on it. We're all in on singing.
I think you should record a on the ballot theme song and have you
that'd be good. We'll have to bring Matt back.
Little jingle or something. Yeah.
We'll let Matt play guitar. Let all the Ballotpedia babies do some background tunes of like their little crying / whining, wailing. So yeah. Well, it's good to see you. It's been a while, and now we're going to talk about Oklahoma, which is one of the earlier states that obtained the initiative. So they've been putting ballot measures on the ballot since 1907, more than 450 total. Tell us a little bit about the overall record, how many have passed, failed, and what kind of measures do Oklahomans tend to see most often?
Yeah, I'll share some inside baseball with our audience. So I don't typically cover Oklahoma. And so when I was preparing for this episode, I found it fascinating to kind of research its history. Yeah. And was surprised to learn that it was one of the earliest states to adopt the initiative process with its state constitution in 1907. Well, yeah, like you said, there have been 450, a little over 450 on the ballot, and roughly half of those have been approved since 1907. Most of those measures were legislatively referred, so about 330, and that's nearly 3 times as many initiatives. So despite having the initiative process for so long, there haven't been a ton in comparison to legislative referrals. Legislative referred measures have also fared better at the ballot box. Roughly 58% of them have been approved compared to 32% of ballot initiatives.
And that's
so it's kind of an interesting
in most
landscape.
States, right? Like most of the time, the legislatively referred measures are going to pass at a higher rate. So.
Yeah, the state legislators have a little bit more to lose if they put something controversial on the ballot.
Yeah, they sort of pre-screen it, you could say.
Yeah, for sure.
How does the process work in Oklahoma? What's required to get something on the ballot? Citizen initiative process, the legislative referrals, how's that all work?
Yeah, so it's pretty tame when it comes to ballot initiative processes. They have 3: the constitutional amendment, state statute, and veto referendum. The signature requirements are based on votes for governor, which is pretty common, but they range from 5% for veto referendums up to 15% for constitutional amendments, which is kind of on the higher end as a percentage. And then they require a simple majority vote for approval. This wasn't always the case. Voters actually adopted this requirement in 1974. Prior to that, the requirement was a majority of total votes cast in the election. So if enough voters didn't vote on the question at all, even though a majority favored the question would be defeated. So they changed that.
Right. So let's play that out with actual numbers, because I always find that hard to grasp. So let's say 100 people vote in an election. The old rules would have been you needed 51 for it to pass. But if, say, it had 46 voted for it and 42 voted against it, and then a bunch of people didn't even vote on it, it would actually have failed, even though more likely than not, they undid that. So now it is a simple majority of 46 vote for it, the 45 vote against it, the 46 holds the day.
Yep.
Very interesting. I don't know if you actually pulled these numbers, but it makes me wonder how many ballot measures in Oklahoma prior to this change failed, but actually would have passed based on the new changes.
Yeah, we should definitely run that. It'd be pretty easy to run with our
somewhere
queries.
On this cool website, Ballotpedia. We probably have that somewhere with our tools. Okay. All right, carry on. What else with Oklahoma then?
Moving to the referral process, it's also pretty standard. Constitutional amendments and state statutes can be referred to the ballot by the state legislature with just a simple majority vote. Statutes do require the governor's signature to be formally certified. Amendments do not. And then something actually interesting about their process in Oklahoma for direct democracy is constitutional convention questions. So Oklahoma is one of 14 states in their constitution that has a provision requiring a constitutional convention question be placed on the ballot every 20 years. But the state legislature has declined to do that since 1970. So there hasn't been a question since 1970. The Constitution also says that citizens can approve a constitutional convention question, but it's not specific as to how that question ends up on the ballot. It doesn't. Most constitutions prescribe like an X% vote by the state legislature to put a constitutional convention.
Okay, so good old con-cons. How are they? So if they're constitutionally required to put it on the ballot, how have they not? Have there been challenges to that?
I guess the language is such that it's like the state legislature has found a loophole to get around it. And perhaps I don't think there's been challenges.
Shall and may and,
yeah,
sort of things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think anyone is dying to vote on it because there haven't been challenges to that. But
those con-con questions don't often pass.
Right.
Or at least in recent history. So Oklahoma, one of the earliest states to adopt INR, it's kind of had some pretty distinct, interesting use cases. So one of our favorite parts of these episodes is to try to delve into some of the more standout measures in the state's histories. What's fascinating from Oklahoma's sort of database that you look through?
Yeah, to look at some of its earliest uses. In 1910, Oklahoma voters defeated an initiative that would have provided women with the right to vote. This was defeated with 59% of voters. It was later adopted in 1918 with a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. Also in 1910, voters approved a initiative amendment to require voters to read and write a section of the state constitution unless they were eligible to vote as of January 1, 1866. So kind of like a literacy test requirement. There were two veto referendums in 1914 and 1938 that would have repealed the state's prohibition on slot machines. Being from Texas, which doesn't have casinos and all that, all of everyone goes to Oklahoma for these sorts of things. So it was interesting to kind of learn some of the background for the gaming industry there. Slot machines were ultimately legalized.
In 2010, when I started working at Ballotpedia, and one of my first jobs was to dig through and update Texas state legislator profiles with their campaign finance histories. And I kept seeing a bunch of Oklahoma casinos over and over again as
trying to get in
contributors. No, I think it was contributing to those Texas state legislators to make sure they don't legalize it.
Oh, to keep it there,
want you wonderful Texans to head over to Oklahoma. So, funny that you found it a different way, but it's going back to 1914 on the slot machines. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, that was a topic on the ballot back then. 1964, voters defeated a initiative that would have established a right to work in the state. That was ultimately adopted in 2001 with a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. So it's kind of interesting that there were like initiative proposals that were ultimately adopted via the referral process just later after public sentiment changed. And then this one's kind of interesting. 1992, voters approved an initiated constitutional amendment to require voters approve revenue-raising bills. So bills that are passed in the state legislature that increase revenue via taxes or however. And if the legislature didn't pass it by a 3/4 vote, it would go to voters to approve. So kind of just raising the threshold for those sorts of bills.
Is that a unique
yes.
setup? I mean, there are other states that have that sort of like, if you want to raise taxes, here's an extra step you have to go through?
Yes, there are some states that have different requirements surrounding raising revenue. This one, I don't think has as high of a threshold for the state legislature's vote. So that's unique to Oklahoma.
Got it. Well, one of the fun things we get to do is some numerical analysis with the ballot measures once we get all of that data input into our database. So we get to find out things like what were the closest calls, the tightest races, and what were the biggest blowouts. So, what did you find?
Yeah, I'll start with the closest and widest margins. There were 9 measures decided by less than a percentage point, which is kind of a lot. When I was looking at Florida recently, there were only 5
Right.
in a relatively same amount of total number of ballot measures. 2 tied for the closest with a margin of 0.27%. One was defeated and one was approved. The approved measure was in 1960 and authorized counties to levy an additional property tax to fund libraries. I wonder like what the historical conflict there was going on, because it doesn't seem, at least on face value, that a very controversial bill that would warrant such a close margin. But that was one of the closest. And then the defeated measure was in 1982, and it would have created basically a state rainy day fund. Another policy that doesn't seem like it would necessarily warrant the closest margin in state history, but did. And then the widest margin was State Question 674, which established a list of crime victims' rights, and that passed with 91% of voters supporting it. So quite a big.
Is that is that the Marsy's Law?
I'm not sure it was called Marsy's Law then, but Oklahoma later adopted Marsy's Law as well, kind of expanding that initial list of crime victims' rights.
Okay. What were some other notable measures that you came across?
Yeah, we kind of come across these same topics in other states, but just to show how wide they reach, an amendment prohibiting the segregation of school children was defeated in 1970. Oklahoma voters made the office of the Secretary of State an appointed office. I found that kind of interesting. In 1975, there's only 12 states have an appointed Secretary of State. And then prior to that, it was an elected office. In 1986, voters increased the minimum age for workers in mines, and they also removed the prohibition that women couldn't work in underground mines.
That's amazing. That's kind of only in 1986?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I think part of that was like this was in the state constitution, so it needed to be changed. There might have been federal law already kind of preempting it, but yeah, that it was changed in the constitution. And then also in the 70s and 80s, there were amendments that repealed, poll taxes and other obsolete provisions related to race in the state constitution.
Yep. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the history for Oklahoma. Let's move to more recent years, though. Oklahoma's had a variety of measures that have received national attention. Can you talk a little bit about what those measures were from, say, 2010 to the 20s? What were the more prominent measures in recent years?
Yeah, you called out 2010. Voters approved a legislatively referred constitutional amendment that year that would have required courts to rely solely on federal and state law and not consider or allow the use of international law or Sharia law in these court proceedings. It was approved by 70% of voters, but it was overturned in federal court on the grounds that it violated the First Amendment. So this was a very notable measure in Oklahoma during that time period. Some other notable ones, marijuana has had an interesting history in Oklahoma. 2018, voters approved it for medicinal uses. And then in 2023, it was on the ballot in June. And voters defeated an initiative to legalize it for recreational use. And it was defeated with 62% of the vote. Medical marijuana initiative was approved with 57% of the vote. So, yeah, kind of an interesting history there.
It's on the higher end, I think, for marijuana measures that have lost. Anecdotal recollections there is. So, okay.
And then finally, this was right around the time, actually, I joined Ballotpedia, and I remember this initiative back in 2019, 2020, voters approving a Medicaid expansion initiative. It was one of the 9 measures decided by less than a percentage point. The margin was 50.49% to 49.51%. And currently 41 states have expanded Medicaid expansion. That was one of the trends of ballot initiative advocacy that we saw during that time period.
I remember that well. Yeah. So what's coming up ahead? What's anything approved for the ballot yet for 2026? Are there any interesting topics that seem to be coming to Oklahoma in the next few years?
Yeah, we already have one qualified for the ballot in Oklahoma in 2026. It will actually be on the ballot in June. It will would increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Currently, Oklahoma has a minimum wage of $7.25, which is the federal minimum wage, and it's been this way since 2009. And then some other initiatives that are filed and then working to get on the ballot would once again address recreational marijuana legalization, as well as open primaries for statewide and county offices and congressional candidates. And then there is another initiative that would make some changes to the state legislative process.
Got it. Well, that June versus November, that always seems to be an issue that comes up periodically. Which month's going to have the measure? Who sets it?
Some states, require initiative. Like in California, they passed a law to require initiatives be on the ballot in November. Whereas in Oklahoma, the governor can order an initiative to be on a different ballot. I think that's the same case. And I've covered Missouri before, same sort of situation. They send initiatives to summer ballots. All
right. Well, that's Oklahoma. Victoria, great to see you. Thanks for coming on. And for our podcast audience, you can learn much more about Oklahoma's ballot measure history at the link in our show notes. We'll be back with another episode sometime soon. We'll be back with more ballot measure coverage, for other states like Arizona, California, Michigan, and many more in the many months ahead. So subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Geoff Pallay, and thanks for listening.